Hi, everyone. I think over the last few weeks, many of us have been feeling lots and lots of different feelings, anxiety, fright, uncertainty. But those feelings have been mixed with glimmers of hope and glimmers of light as we hear stories of heroism and stand in awe of our chayalim and Nalim who went out to help. This ultra love for Am Yisrael. This week in Parshat Vayetze, we see a similar story of someone who's also feeling frightened and feeling uncertain and unsure of himself. The Parsha opens with Yaakov on the run from Esav, fleeing for his life. He's definitely feeling uncertain as he goes into the unknown. And yet, the Torah doesn't actually focus on his fright, but rather on the message of hope that Hashem has to give him. Let's look at the psukim inside. The Parsha opens with the dream of Yaakov. And we read that as he ran away from Beersheba to Haran, he encounters a certain place and he lodges there. And then we're told, Vayachalom, v'hinei sulam mutzav artza v'rosho magia hashamayim. He dreamed and he sees a sulam, normally translated as a ladder, which is set on the ground, but its head, its top, reaches hashamayim, reaches up towards heaven. And we're told that these angels of God go up and down it. And Hashem is standing upon it. And then we hear Hashem's words. I'm Hashem, the God of your father Abraham, the God of Yitzchak. And Hashem promises him two things. The land that you're lying upon, I'm going to give to you. Second, your seed, your progeny, is going to be like the dust of the earth. You'll spread to the east and to the west, north and south. These two brachot are the brachot that we normally associate with the brachot of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, brachot of Zerah and Eretz, brachot of land and of progeny. And then Pasuk Tedvav moves into a special, specific bracha for Yaakov at this juncture in his life. Hashem tells Yaakov, I'm with you. I'm going to watch over you in all that you go. And I'm going to return you to this land. I will not leave you until I have done for you all that I've spoken to you. And Pasuk Ted Zayin, Yaakov Mishnato, Yaakov wakes up and he says, he recognizes that this place is a holy place, that there's a presence of Hashem here, and he's in awe. And he says, how awesome is this place? This is none other than a house of God and a gateway to heaven. The next few psukim describe what Yaakov does in the morning when he wakes up. He sets a stone that had been at his head. He sets it into a monument. He calls the place that this happened in Beit El. And then he makes a vow saying, if Hashem is with him and Hashem actually does watch over him, then this site of this stone, when he comes back, will be a Beit Elokim, will be a house of God. So we have a dream, and we also have, with a bunch of visuals, we have a ladder, we have angels going up and down, we have Hashem standing at the top, perhaps of it, or perhaps of him, we're not sure if it's on top of the ladder or on top of Yaakov himself. And then we have Hashem's own words. And what I want to focus on is the different ways that there are, potentially at least, to interpret this dream. On one hand, one might say, what does it need interpreting for? You have visuals, and then Hashem has his verbal communication, which presumably is the interpretation of the dream. In our case, though, it's not so simple. Even though in many cases in Tanakh, when we have a chalom, we know that the interpretation comes with it. Here, there's no direct correlation between the visuals and the words that Hashem promises Yaakov. What symbolizes Eretz and Zerah, the land and progeny, in those visuals that he saw? Where's the image of Hashem watching over him? And on the flip side, what exactly is this sulam ladder thing supposed to represent? What is represented by the malachim going up and down? Is there significance to the fact that they go up first and then down? Is there significance to the fact that there's this emphasis on that it's set in the ground and that it reaches up to Shamayim? So many commentators are going to be talking about the different possible messages. What I want to start with, though, is, since this is a visual, what exactly did Yaakov see? We, as a reader, are reading a description of the visual, which means that we actually don't get a clear understanding of what it was exactly that Yaakov saw. As I said beforehand, when we have the words nitzav alav, we, the reader, don't know if Hashem was standing on him, i.e. on Yaakov, or standing upon the ladder, because in the word it's ambiguous, but presumably for Yaakov, viewing this in a dream, it wasn't ambiguous. We, the reader, might not know exactly what these malachim looked like going up and down, what were they doing as they went up and down, but obviously Yaakov, when he saw the dream, saw something. So as a way of getting into what Yaakov might have seen, I want to start with a few pieces of artwork on our piece on this dream. And what you see here, I'm going to just move this so you can actually see the screen, are three different artworks. One is by a Spanish artist named Murillo from the 17th century who paints in the Baroque style. The middle piece, named Jacob's Ladder, by this is a Catalonian Haggadah from the 14th century by an unknown artist. It's known as the Sister Haggadah because it's very similar in its imagery to a much more well-known Haggadah known as the Golden Haggadah. And finally, on the right side, we have by a French artist, Jacques Della, an image that was actually painted on blue onyx, and that's what you see in the background there. At a glance, I think there are already a few things that someone should be able to notice that are different in the imagery. First of all, what is the sulam? Both Murillo and the Sister Haggadah paint a ladder. And that's how I think most of us tend to view the word sulam, since in modern Hebrew, the word sulam means a ladder. Importantly and interestingly, the word sulam, though, occurs only one place in Tanakh. I'm going to go and look at a concordance with you. We're looking at Ala Torah, and I'm going to click on the word sulam. That takes us to a concordance, and we see this is the only pasuk in all of Tanakh in which the word appears. And so really, we actually have no idea what the word sulam means. Is it a ladder, or is it something else? So if you look at the right side here, it says arachim kshurim, words that are related, or entries that are related to the word sulam. And we see that the word salal, the verb salal, which means to lift or elevate, is probably part of the etymology of the word sulam. But of course, all that means for us is that this is something that might be elevated or lifted. Interestingly, the word sulam might actually have Akkadian origins, and it might be an Akkadian cognate. The word similtu in Akkadian actually means a stairway. So you have very different possibilities, which we'll actually see in our commentators. The modern understanding of a ladder. On the right side, Jack Stella's ramp that he seems to be making here. Okay? Or perhaps this idea that it's a stairway, and specifically knowing its Akkadian origin, perhaps a stairway that in Mesopotamian literature would be a ziggurat, a staired temple. So keep all of those in mind, but recognize that we don't even know what the word sulam means, and these artistic renderings highlight that ambiguity. Second difference in looking at these different pictures, I think, is the role of the angels. If we look at Murillo's angels, they tend to be going up and down the ladder, but the two ones on the bottom are paying a little bit of attention to Yaakov. In fact, they seem to be saying hello and goodbye. In contrast, if you look in the Sister Haggadah, our angels actually aren't even going up and down the ladder. Almost all of the angels are surrounding Yaakov. We have two that seem to be even, one at his foot, one holding him by his head. And to some extent, that message of, and Hashem nitzav alav, Hashem standing over him. It's actually in this image, the angels that are standing over him. Hashem is pictured here in the corner, interestingly, with two faces here. According to Joe Milgram, who wrote an article about this piece of artwork, this might actually be related to a Targum translation of the Psukim, which suggests that what the angels saw was that on Hashem's throne up on high, there was an image of Yaakov. Then we went down the ladder and they saw Yaakov himself, and they're comparing the two. So whatever it is, in this image, so focusing on the angels themselves, the angels are very involved in Yaakov. Okay? Third image, these angels aren't interested in Yaakov at all. They're going up and down the ladder, but talking and conversing among themselves. And I think the difference amongst the images highlights that question of what is the role of the angels going up and going down? The fact that they're called Malachei Elokim, does that have any specific significance that they're dafka, angels of God, and God using the justice, the name of Hashem, Elokim, as opposed to the name that we associate with Rachamim, with mercy? Are they supposed to be paying attention to Yaakov? Are they actually just talking to each other? What do they represent? Okay? Third difference between the images is just the atmosphere itself. Murillo paints a very dark portrait, which gives almost an ominous feel to the story, which seems to be somewhat at contrast with Hashem's reassuring words to Yaakov that he's going to be watching over him, making us question why in the world would Murillo decide to make this ominous portrait? Is he just trying to depict the fact that it's nighttime? Or are we supposed to feel some type of a fear? And the truth is, in the psukim themselves, when Yaakov wakes up, it says that Yaakov was afraid. And you wonder, wait, where's this fear coming from if Hashem just said, I'm going to watch over you? Okay? In contrast, obviously, in the Sister Haggadah, we have this nice, bright, full of colors, which matches, I think, the hope that we tend to feel connected to the message of the story. Okay? One last little thing to pay attention to. In the images of Murillo and the Sister Haggadah, the latter is clearly grounded in the earth and going up to Shemayim. Less so in Stella's image. And I think, again, it raises the question of why this emphasis on Eretz and Shemayim? Why doesn't it just say, and Rosho B'Shamayim? Why do you have to tell us that Dochel Stet on earth? So I think that the artwork here really does raise some of the important questions as to what are we supposed to take out of the images and the visuals of the dream. How do they relate to Hashem's words that come afterwards? So I want to go back to our Mefarshim on the story, looking right now, starting and trying to see basically three different approaches to our story. I want to start with an approach that reads, in some ways this is the easiest approach, that reads the message of the dream to be a message of divine providence and protection. So this is probably most well known through Rashi, though Rashi himself is drawing off of Rishit Rabbah. In Pasuk Yudbet, Rashi, and understanding the words, we'll actually get to it faster today, that the angels were Olim v'Yordim, raises a well-known question, Olim tchila v'achar kach yordim. He says, look, the pasuk says that they're going up first and then they're coming down. And Rashi has an unstated question here. Shouldn't it be the opposite? If we're talking about angels whose abode is in the heavens, shouldn't they be starting up on high and then coming down, not the opposite? So why are they ascending and then descending? So he answers, Malachim shelivuhu ba'aretz, im yotzin b'chutz la'aretz. The reason that the order is ascending and then descending is because there have been angels that have been accompanying Yaakov throughout his stay in Eretz Yisrael, and they're not allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael, and so they go up to Shemayim, v'yardu malachei chutza la'aretz l'lavoto, and instead, other angels that are angels connected to chutz la'aretz come down to accompany him. So Rashi here is presenting an image of these angels going up and down, whose job it is to accompany Yaakov. And this, of course, matches the words of Hashem himself. I'm going to be with you wherever you go. Don't worry. As you leave Eretz Yisrael, there are going to be malachim that are going to accompany you. Rashi highlights the fact that there's a different status, perhaps, of Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz, and that might actually have been at the core of part of Yaakov's anxiety. There is definitely a belief in ancient Near Eastern times that there are gods of certain lands. And you might not, and Yaakov might have been fearing, like, wait, maybe when I leave Eretz Yisrael, Hashem won't be with me in the same way that he had been with me in Eretz Yisrael. And Hashem shows him in his dream, like, no, don't worry. I've been with you in Eretz Yisrael, and I'm going to be with you in Chutz La'aretz, just as I have been with you until now. I think there's another additional point here, though, that comes out of Rashi, even if it's not explicit. I think often when someone's in a place of distress, they question, where is Hashem? What we don't, though, ever think about is the opposite. do we ever appreciate when things are good that means that Hashem is with us? And what Rashi here, I think, is highlighting is, no, there were malachim with you until now. Someone's been watching over you when things were good, and Hashem reassures him, and don't worry, now that things are bad and you have to leave and you have to go into exile and you have to flee from your brother, I'm going to be with you just as much. That's Rashi. Ramban takes a very similar approach, but he reads the details of the image in a different way. So he tells us, "Har'au b'chalom ha'nevuah, ki kol ha'na'aseh ba'aretz na'aseh yedei ha'malachim, v'hakol b'gzerat elyon alei." He shows him in this dream that everything that happens on earth happens via Hashem's messengers in the form of these angels or messengers, and everything is via the decree of God. When Hashem sends his messengers into the land, they can't do anything big or small until they go back up to consult with Hashem. And they go and report to Hashem what they see in the land. And then Hashem commands them to do whatever it is that he wants them to do. So Ramban here, as opposed to Rashi, views these angels not as individual guardian angels of Yaakov, but angels in general that represent Hashem's providence in the world. These angels are angels that are constantly going up and down with the message that you should know everything that happens on earth is via divine decree. And this already perhaps should be part of the reassurance to Yaakov. Right now, Yaakov's living and things are uncertain. His brother's out to get him. He's fleeing. He's having a hard time. And one of the messages that Hashem says is, even when things are bad, no, I'm on top of it, right? This isn't happening randomly. This is via divine decree. The malachim are going up and down and looking and trading out and not doing anything on their own, only based on what Hashem says. Everything that happens in those divine messengers can take all sorts of form. He then moves on and he moves to the specific message to Yaakov. He says, Ramban notes, we don't just have malachim going up and down. The pasuk also tells us that Hashem is standing on top of him or on top of it. Ramban reads it as on top of the sulam, on top of the ladder or whatever he understands sulam to be. ומבטיחו ליעקב בהבטחה גדולה להודיעו שהוא לא יהיה ביד המלאכים, אבל הוא יהיה חלק השם ויהיה עמו תמיד. Ramban suggests that Yaakov is getting a special bracha of providence. There's divine providence, general providence for everyone. Angels that are going to be accompanying all in their lives. He says, but what Yaakov is here getting is a promise of very specific divine providence, where Yaakov's not going to be in the hands of the angels, but Yaakov's going to be under the direct providence of Hashem. Hashem is Nitzav Alav. The Malachim are going up and down for everybody else, but Yaakov himself gets very specific divine providence of Hashem. So both Rashi and Ramban are suggesting that there's a connection between both the visual imagery of the dream and the message, the verbal message that Hashem gives after him, and that the main message lies in those words, Ushmarticha b'chol asher tilech. I'm going to be watching over you everywhere you go. There's one third variation of this general approach of divine protection, and that's from the Midrash. I'm going to bring it to you from Tanhuma, which reads this in a pretty different way. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman, Elu sareu motolam. In understanding what these malachim represent, Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman says they're not specific guardian angels of Yaakov, nor are they simply messengers of Hashem representing divine providence as a whole. Rather, these are guardian angels not of Am Yisrael or Yaakov, but rather of Umot Olam, the nations of the world. Damar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman, Milamed Sher Ha'arlo HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'Avinu Yaakov Tarasha Bavel Oliv Shiv'im Ukin V'Yoled. He tells us Hashem was teaching Yaakov a lesson in history, that the guardian angel of Babel was going up 70 rungs on the ladder. So the Midrash is presumably reading it as a ladder itself. That the guardian angel of Madai then goes up 52 rungs and comes down. Of Yavan goes up 100 and comes down. And then he sees the guardian angel of Edom, Allah, V'lo yada kama, and it just keeps on going up. At that moment, Yaakov is looking at the guardian angel of Edom, and it keeps on rising up that ladder, and he's filled with fear. V'amar, Shema lazeh ein lo yerida? And he questions, wait, maybe this one's never going to fall, right? All the other nations that are nations that end up subjugating Am Yisrael went up, but then went down. Bavel lasted, the subjugation to Bavel lasted for 70 years, but then they fell. Madai, we were subjugated for 52 years, but then they fell. Yavan for 100 years, and then they fell. He's like, but Edom, it's not coming down. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem turns to Yaakov and he gives him reassurance. Ata al tirad Yaakov va'al tichat Yisrael. This is a quote from Yirmiyahu. Don't be afraid, Yaakov. Don't tremble, Yisrael. Even though it looks like he's coming all the way up to me, don't worry, I'm going to bring him down. So this midrash reads these angels as not guardian angels of Yaakov at all, but rather angels that represent other nations, each of which at some point is going to be in a position of power, but which are going to fall. And you read the midrash and you wonder, wait, how does this relate to what's going on in Yaakov's life? Right? Yaakov is on the run from Esav. Is it really possible that as he's on the run from Esav, Hashem's giving him a message in history that this ladder represents the ladder of history and that the angels represent future nations that Yaakov would have no knowledge of that have to do with Am Yisrael? Yaakov doesn't even have children yet, let alone does he view himself as a father of a nation. So of course one has to recognize that the midrash is a midrash. It's not necessarily trying at all to give us the pshat, to give us a simple sense of the verses. What the midrash is trying to do is see in the message to Yaakov a message to Yisrael, meaning a message to Am Yisrael. Yaakov in the story in Tanakh for the midrash is representative, of course, of Am Yisrael as a whole, of Klal Yisrael. And his running away from Esav is representative of all the times that we've had to go into exile, that we've had to flee from our enemies. And Hashem tells Yaakov / Yisrael, us, don't worry. Yes, there are periods of subjugation, but recognize those periods of subjugation will end. Those people who are in power will eventually fall. And of course, the Midrash is picking up on Edom, Edom being, of course, another name for Esav. In the Midrashic understanding, Edom, Esav is equivalent to Rome. The Roman subjugation hadn't ended in the time that the Midrash is being written. We were still in the what we call Galut Roma in the time of the Midrash, and so it seems like it's happening forever. And the Midrash is telling not Yaakov, but Am Yisrael, its readers, don't worry, this too will end. Hashem is with us. Hashem will be with us. So that's, I think, one first way of reading our psukim and reading the message of this dream, both its visuals and its verbal communication by Hashem. This is a message of reassurance, of recognition that even when times are hard, they might last for a certain amount of time, but at the end of the day, Hashem is watching over us. There is divine providence. Everything that goes on in the world, don't think it's random. Don't think that there's no plan. There is a plan. This is all part of what Hashem has been doing. He's recognizing and aware of what's going on, and he's watching over us and will bring us back home. From that, I want to move into a second reading of our image of our Chalom, and that's a reading that suggests that this is not about divine providence, but rather about prayer. And again, we'll start with a midrash from Breshit Rabbah. Okay. Everyone see where the yellow is? I'm going to start there. The Midrash Rabbah, Breshit Rabbah, reads this Chalom as being a metaphor, like many of the other people, but as opposed to them, which say that each image in the Chalom represents a certain idea, they suggest that each image in the Chalom represents another image which then represents an idea. So you'll understand what I'm saying as I read it. He says, Vinei sulam, zeh kevesh. Says, what's the sulam? He says, that's a ramp. So as we saw beforehand, one of the understandings of a sulam might be a ramp. It doesn't have to be a ladder. He says, but the ramp of what? Mutzav arza zeh hamizbech. He says, it's set on the ground. What's set on the ground? The mizbech. So he says, the sulam is the ramp that goes up to the mizbech, to the altar. And he says, how do you get from the word mutzav arza to mizbech? So he quotes the pasuk in Shmot Chaf, mizbech adamat haseli. The pasuk in Shmot Chaf tells us that we have to make a mizbech out of adamah, a mizbech out of earth. So their midrash is connecting mutzav arza, understanding the land there to mean earth, and saying, what does earth represent? A mizbech of earth. So in other words, what they just changed this image from being a ladder set on the ground, they have changed it into an image of a ramp leading up to a mizbeach. And its head goes and reaches heavenward. Says what's it reaching heavenwards? Elu hakorbanot shavirchan olel hashamayim. He says this represents those sacrifices whose odor, whose smell goes up to Shamayim. So what goes up to Shamayim? The smell from the sacrifices. And what are these angels of God? Elu kohanim dolim. These are the kohanim. Olim v'yordim, they go up and down. Shehem olim v'yordim b'kedesh, because they go up and down the ramp. So Midrash Rabbah, interestingly, for questioning, okay, what did he see? So I'm pretty sure most of us, if I had asked you to draw and make one of those artistic renderings that we had done beforehand, would probably not get to a korban, a mizbeach with a ramp. So you wonder on one level, like, wait, what's the midrash doing? Why is it saying the sulam is a ramp of a mizbeach and changing the whole image so that now I'm actually seeing different things? But the truth is, what they really are saying, of course, is that this image that Yaakov saw on the whole represents an encounter with God. It represents how we connect to Hashem, and the Midrash is picking up on korbanot as a way of connecting to Hashem, that we bring korbanot as a connection. We're going to move to Shadal, which I think has a very similar idea, but in a much more pshat way, in a much more simple sense of the psukim. He says, "Hanachon kidivrei Don Yitzchak." He's referring to Don Yitzchak Abarbanel. He says, "Olim u'miviyim lefanav yibarach tefilot hatachtonim." He says, what's going up and down? He says, this is going up to bring before Hashem the tefillot of those that are found on the bottom. What comes down? If we just pray to Hashem, our tefillot went up. What comes down is Hashem's answer to the mitpalalim, to those who are davening. V'zehu shamar Yaakov, v'zeh shar hashamayim. He says, and that's why Yaakov calls this place a gateway to heaven. Shemikan tefillot b'nei adam olot hashamayim, because this is where tefillot can go up to the shamayim. He continues, Nitzav alav al Yaakov. He says, Hashem is standing not on top of the ladder, but on top of Yaakov. Hakavana omedet. So he says it doesn't mean literally standing on top of him, but standing next to him. And he brings a few proof texts for that kind of a reading. And he ends, Ulefichach amar, im ze ki im beit Elokim. This must be a house of God. Kachar shamalachim heviu lefanav tfilat Yaakov, kivyachol yarda hashchina elav lahafticho. Says, since once the malachim come before him to bring the tefillah of Yaakov, it's as if Hashem came down to promise. So Shadal, I think, is taking that same concept that was raised in the Midrash of Breshit Rabbah in a much more pshat sense. And it says, this is literally a ladder that connects heaven and earth, that represents man approaching Hashem through tefillah. Your tefillah goes up as if the rungs of the ladder till it gets to Hashem. Hashem's answer comes back down. Where are they getting this in the psukim? So Shadal himself basically says it explicitly. This whole approach of reading this as a tefillah is coming from Yaakov's reaction to the dream, where he says, this is a Beit Elokim, this is a house of God. Okay? And we have this whole concept of him viewing it as a place where man can connect to God. One, of course, though, has the question, what then is the message of Hashem to Yaakov? Was he just supposed to know that Beit El is, learn from here that Beit El is meant to be some place of communion with Hashem. So I think there's two different potential ways of reading this. Many of you might be familiar with that midrash that reads the words "Vayifga b'makom," the very opening of our story, that he encounters the place, to mean not just that he happened upon a place, that Yaakov, when he was running away, happened upon a place, but that "Vayifga b'makom" means that Yaakov davened in this place. And the truth is, again, to get a sense of what does the word "vayifga" mean. So if we look at the way that the word is used, we actually can see two different things. In the first place where the word is used in Tanakh, in Breshit, in the story of Avram buying the cave from Ephron Achiti, we're told that he asked the Hittites around him, Shma'uni upig'uli be'Ephron ben Salcha. Please listen to me, and pig'uli beseech. So the word paga has this connotation in certain places in Tanakh as to beseech. In other places, the next pasuk is ours. We have a meaning of to hit or strike or perhaps encounter. When he says, let's go, and this is in the context of Bnei Israel leaving Mitzrayim with Moshe talking to Paro, and he says, let us sacrifice to Hashem, lest he strike us with plague, lest he hit us, meaning a physical encounter. And so I think it's an interesting word where you can understand where Chazal get what they get from. Literally, yes, it just means to encounter. But if you're thinking about the context of this dream, where Yaakov is going to be encountering God, then encounter takes on this connotation of tefillah, of praying. And so Chazal learned from here that this was Yaakov, davening in the place, not just encountering the place. And if so, it's probably not just a prayer, but a prayer of beseeching, which we see as one of the usages of the word. If so, then what might be happening? What message is Yaakov getting in his chalom? If Yaakov had just davened to Hashem, he just prayed. But what Yaakov doesn't know is, but did Hashem hear my prayers? Because often we daven, but we don't tend to know if Hashem is answering us because we don't get a visual or a verbal communication that says, I'm here, I listened, I know. And what Hashem tells Yaakov is, yes, I did. Know that whenever you daven, and not just you, Yaakov, but you, Yisrael, know that your tefillot are coming up to me, and my answer will come back down to you. That, I think, is one potential message if one takes this approach, that what he sees is an image of prayer or korbanot. I think there's another possibility, and if you take the simple meaning of vayifga b'makom, that Yaakov actually hadn't davened, but he'd just come here and lodged for the night, what Hashem might be telling him is calling on Yaakov to daven, right? You've come here, and Hashem's telling him, look, if you daven to me, know your prayers will come up to me and I will answer you. And it's an invitation to Yaakov. No, tefillah is always a possibility, and that don't think that your tefillot don't have any power, that your tefillot don't matter. Your tefillot can be effective. Pray, and if you pray, I will listen and I will answer. And of course, the chalom is followed by Yaakov in the morning making a neder to Hashem and praying to Hashem. So those, I think, are two ways of potentially reading the message if we take this as an image of prayer. There's one other way of looking at this as an image of prayer, which is very, very different, which has been, at least the way I've read it, through an article by Professor Elitzur, who was a professor of Tanakh. He died about 25 years ago. And he was a professor of Tanakh and Limudei Eretz Yisrael. And he writes an article where he suggests that if you really want to understand the message of this Halom of Yaakov, of the dream of Yaakov, you have to compare our story to the story of Migdal Bavel. Okay? And here I'm going to share my screen for a second with a few parallels to the story of Migdal Bavel. So first of all, at the basis of this suggestion and of this reading of our story is the idea that we mentioned beforehand, that a sulam is not a ladder, nor is it a ramp, but it's rather a stairway related to the Akkadian word similtu, that really means a stairway, and that it refers specifically, perhaps, to a Mesopotamian ziggurat, which you can see on the screen. A ziggurat was basically a stepped pyramid, which was a temple in Mesopotamian culture. And it might have had a bunch of stairways, as you see in this image itself, but the image itself is just a stairway because it's basically a stepped pyramid. And what this reading of our story suggests is that what Yaakov saw in his head was a ziggurat. And you wonder, why would Hashem show him a ziggurat? Or why is the reader supposed to be thinking about a ziggurat? What does this have to do with Yaakov running away from Esav? How are you supposed to understand? So as I suggested beforehand, Professor Elitzur suggests you should read our story on the background of the story of Migdal Bavel. And there are several parallels between the stories. Most people are probably familiar. I'll just summarize it in quick. You have a group of people who are are heading from the east. They decide that they want to build a Migdal, a tower, and a city, and they want its head to go up to Shamayim. And we're told how they take their bricks and they use them instead of stone, and they start to build. And Hashem looks and sees what they're doing, and he goes down. And they say in their description of why they want to do this, we want to do this so that we can make for ourselves a name, ten nafut, lest we spread out over the face of the earth. Hashem comes down and foils their plan. And of course, the story ends with Hashem, giving them all different languages and spreading them on the face of the earth. There's lots of different ways of reading the story of Migdal Bavel. The way Professor Elitzur is reading the story, and many moderns read it in a very similar light, is that the Migdal here is not a tower, but is a ziggurat, and that what the people were doing was trying to build a temple whose head was going to be in the heavens. And on the backdrop of what we know about Mesopotamian ziggurats, they used to be in almost every major Mesopotamian town, there was some temple, which was sort of the height and glory of the people living there. It was their way of making for themselves a name. And what Professor Elitzur suggests Migdal Bavel's story is all about is mocking their hubris and thinking that they can reach to the heavens, and thinking that the point of making this Migdal is for themselves to make a name for themselves, totally misinterpreting what real worship is all about. So if we look at the chart, we'll see a bunch of parallels to the story of our story. They leave from the east in the story of Migdal Bavel. Yaakov, of course, is heading to the east from Eretz Israel. We have our Migdal and our Shulam, which might be the equivalent ziggurats. In both cases, we're told Rosho Bashamayim. And just so you should know, in Torah, these are the only two psukim which something is described as having its head in heavens. Whereas in the Migdal Bavel story, though, they use brick instead of stone. In our story, it's very emphasized that Yaakov takes a stone that he's going to then make his maseva, his monument, out of. While they're wanting to build a city, Yaakov's out in the open, not in a city at all. He seems to be in a field someplace, in uninhabited territory. Okay? Whereas they say, let's make for ourselves a name. Yaakov comes here and he recognizes, oh, Hashem is in this place. He's crying out to God, not crying out to make a name for himself. They say, let's we spread. Hashem in his promise to Yaakov says the opposite. You shall spread. Whereas in the story of Migdal Bavel, Hashem has to go down to see, as if he's not part of them. By us, Hashem is right on top of him. Okay? Finally, in the story of Migdal Bavel, we call the place that happens Karashma Bavel, Kisham Balal. This is a play on words. We called the name of the place Bavel because Hashem had mixed up their languages. But important to note, the original meaning of the word Bavel actually means gate of God. They thought that their Mesopotamian ziggurats were a gateway to God. And of course, Yaakov here says, he calls the place Beit El. And why? This is a Beit Elokim, Shar Hashemayim, and this is a gateway to heaven. So we can see a lot of similarities between the stories, and also, of course, how they're flip sides. And what Professor Elitzur suggests is that one of the messages of our story is what is actually prayer in Jewish tradition. Prayer in Jewish tradition is not about making a name for yourself. You don't make a temple in order to be the height and glory of your culture. Okay? Instead, prayer is something that anyone that wants to find Hashem and be able to say, Yesh Hashem b'makom hazeh, you can find him. And it doesn't have to be in a city, and it doesn't have to be in a temple. It could be just ba'aretz. It could just be b'yifka b'makom hahu, any place where you happen to be. That's where you can encounter Hashem. And the goal, of course, of encountering Hashem has to be to make that connection to Hashem and not to self-glorify. So I think that's a very interesting way of looking again at the story in a very, very different way, where it is about prayer, but a very specific message of what prayer is supposed to be. And this is, of course, for Yaakov and also obviously for Am Yisrael as well. Okay? I'm going to share the screen one more time and move to one last way of reading our story. A third way of reading our story suggests that the message is not one of divine providence, nor is it one about prayer, but rather about human potential. And we're gonna look at the Perush of Rabbanit, okay, who suggests, and I'm not going to read the whole thing just because it's somewhat lengthy, but he suggests, we'll look at the second paragraph on the page. It says, Hasulam mutzav arza nomala lamasa, min hashamayim natan Hashem emtzei bidei yoshvei haaretz, she'bezrato hem yuchlu litkasher litchaber hashamayim. Says this sulam is something that's supposed to connect heavens and earth, and that's the emphasis on heavens and earth, because Hashem has given us a means for those that are living on the ground to go and connect to Hashem. And he says, Im kiyumo shel kol mitzvot elokit oleh adam shlav achad nosach besulam zeh hamovil hashlemut ha'ila'it hashamayim. He says, every time that someone is mekayem a mitzvah, he could slowly move up the rungs of the ladder and get closer and closer to God. But Rav David Tzvi Hoffman suggests this sulam, as opposed to represent, isn't just a connection between man and God, but it's actually a ladder of human potential. This is supposed to represent the idea that you can climb higher and higher every time that you do a good deed, every time that you act. He then moves on to question, well, what about these malachim? What role do they play? And he points out that the malachim really are basically all the natural forces that can either help or hinder you, depending on what you're doing in your path up and to realize your human potential. And he quotes a midrash, which I'm not going to read for interest of time, I'm not going to read here, where he suggests that the midrash suggests that the malachim that are, the forces that are looking to either help or hinder, come up and down this ladder, watching you as you move up or down the ladder of human potential. And in this case, they went down, and what did they see? They saw that Yaakov is there on the floor, sleeping. And he said, and the reason that the malachim are referred to as malachei Elokim, reading Elokim as justice, is because these malachim look at Yaakov and they're upset. They're upset because what are you doing sleeping as opposed to realizing your human potential? There's something for you to do and you're just sleeping. You can't just be asleep. You have to act. Man's job is not to just sleep away his days, but rather to climb that ladder. And he suggests that when the image ends with Hashem mitzav, says that's Hashem, the name of Hashem being the name of mercy. That what is Hashem's job in watching you as you move up the ladder of human potential? Hashem is there to be merachem on you and to help you and make sure that you don't sit asleep on the bottom, but rather start climbing the ladder up. And that Hashem reminds you when you're going in the wrong direction to help push you as you continue up. And so for Rav David Tzvi Hoffman, this is a message of, look, Yaakov, you're on the run. One could even say that it's a message of, look, Yaakov, where you are in life, reflect on yourself. Where are you? Are you where you want to be? Are you as honest as you want to be? You just swindled your brother. Is that where you want to be? Or do you want to continue moving up the ladder and improve yourself? Or one can just say, in general, Hashem teaching Yaakov and all of us, of course, that you always have to be reflecting where you are, questioning, am I asleep or am I doing? Am I moving up the ladder or am I moving down the ladder? And recognize that there's so many things in life that might hinder or might help you, but that Hashem is always there to help. So just to close and put together the various different readings that we looked at, we've seen basically three readings of Yaakov's dream. A reading that reads it as a message of divine protection, a reading that reads it as a symbol of prayer, and finally, a reading that suggests that this is all about human potential. And I think that one doesn't have to suggest that these readings are mutually exclusive, and it's very possible that the message to Yaakov was a combination of all three. a combination message of life is about both bitachon on one side, having trust in Hashem, praying to Hashem, recognizing that there's divine providence, but on the other side also a message of the need for hishtadlut, the need for our own human efforts, and to put in our own efforts in improving our lot and making things right. And so to bring this back to what's going on right now, I just wanted to end with a tefillah that all of our tefillot go up to Hashem, go up to that ladder, reach Hashem, and that Hashem's answer comes back down in the form of divine protection and providence, and that He helps our soldiers complete their mission and protect them as they put in their hishtadlut to help us in Am Yisrael. Thank you.